Hello, and welcome to the Black Ponderer. I'm Neil Trotter, and today we're going to be talking about a classic philosopher. A very classic, very important philosopher, big name, and we're going to do that via a text right here. Here it is. Let me just put it in the frame here. Let me get the white balance correct. All right, here we go. Lectures on the Philosophy of History by, G.W.F. Guaga. It's like a horrible pronunciation of his first name. Greg Hegel. It's Hegel time. It's Hegel time here at the Black Ponder. That's right. We're finally getting into Hegel. If you study philosophy seriously, if you really want to, get serious about your study in philosophy, eventually you will have to study some Hegel. You eventually have to read some Hegel texts, right? Because this man is foundational to philosophical thought. Many contemporary philosophers, and even many of the old school philosophers, derived their thought, what they were thinking from what Hegel is talking about. Now, not everybody agreed with the man, but he was highly influential in the world of philosophy. When we talk about Hegel, when Hegel's brought up, most of the time people are talking about the phenomenology of spirit, right? That infamously famous text for its difficulty and complexity, but also its influence in the philosophical world. Eventually we'll go there. Here at the Black Ponder, eventually we will discuss that book. But let's get a little bit more basic, right? Let's get a little bit more previous in his timeline of texts. But this text right here, it really isn't that basic. We're all talking about Hegel here. By the way, this was free, right? I just printed this out and put it in a binder. That's all I did. But Hegel, like many philosophers, was a university college professor, and he taught philosophy. Now back when Hegel was teaching philosophy as a field of study was much more general. It included a lot of sciences. It included a lot of social sciences, a lot of the humanities. It was a more general field of study. So he taught history as well. And this text is, what it's titled is what it is. It's just the lectures of his class, Philosophy of History. But before we dive into this text, it's important to understand. He starts talking about history, like world history. Now, is he right in his discussion about how humanity progressed throughout the ages? No, a lot of times his assessment is wrong. But the reason why you should read this book is because you're getting into the mind of Hegel, and it helps you understand the way he's thinking about things. And it will definitely prepare you for when you go to his more later works that are more complex, like the Phenomenology of Spirit. You already kind of have an idea before going in, okay, this is where this guy's headspace is. And you already introduced to a lot of the ideas that these later texts are going to present. It's a great introduction. So with that said, let's dive into some quotes. If you happen to be following along, because many people are like, dude, give me some page numbers so I can follow along. Well, let me just show you here. It is translated from the third German edition by this guy right there. You see him? And it is I got it from, it's London published. It is from Google's free library that has all these books you can just print out. So if you want to follow along from that, feel free. I'll give you the page numbers. So I'm going to start here on page 4, right here. This is starting on the second paragraph. And what I want to discuss right here, we're talking about history. So what is history? What is history? Let's think about that. The philosophy of history. What is history? Well, let me just read you this quote. The second kind of history, just I've skipped ahead. He talks about different kinds of history. Let's just focus on the second kind of history in this video, which is what Hegel is talking about. We may call the reflective. Okay, italics reflective. It is history whose mode of representation is not really confined by the limits of the time to which it relates, but whose spirit transcends the present. I'll skip a sentence. It is the aim of the investigator to gain a view of the entire history of a people or a country or of the world. In short, what we call universal history. Italics, universal history. In this case, the working up of the historical material is the main point. So what's being said here? What's being said, what we have to think about is, history is not just a record. It's not just a record of events like, okay, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. That's what we call history. No, history is more than that. History is a creative endeavor. It is a construction. Okay, it's not just a record. People are constructing history. Okay, let's think about that. But I'm going to skip down to the second to last line here. Among us, each labors to invent a purely individual point of view. Instead of writing history, we are always beating our brains to discover how history ought to be written. Reflective history. The saying that goes, history is written by the victors, not the losers. That's something that's been known for a while, and if you don't really know it, you should, right? When you read a textbook and you go to school, you get the history that you're taught is a history of a particular frame, presented by a particular person or people, right? It's not everything. You're not getting the history of everything. You're getting the history from a specific perspective, a specific point of view. I continue on page 8. This is the 14th line. It must be remarked that when reflective history has advanced to the adoption of general points of view, if the position taken is a true one, these are found to constitute not merely external thread, a superficial series, but are the inward guiding soul of the occurrences and actions that occupy a nation's annals. For, like the sole conductor Mercury, the idea is in truth the leader of peoples and of the world, and spirit, the rational and necessitated will of that conductor, is and has been the director of the events of the world's history. To become acquainted with spirit in this, its office of guidance, is the objective of our present undertaking. This brings us to the third kind of history, the philosophical. Let me read you my notes in the margin so we can get a better understanding of what's going on here. History is not just a series of events. There is an aim, themes which these events follow, guided by the Spirit. I continue here on the next page, page 9. This is the 15th line. But as it is the business of history simply to adopt into its records what is and has been actual occurrences and transactions, and since it remains true to its character in proportion as it strictly adheres to its data, we seem to have in philosophy a process diametrically opposed to that of the historiographer. This contradiction and the charge consequently brought against speculation shall be explained and confuted. Let me read you my notes. Does the bias of the spirit, which philosophy introduces, interferes with truthful recording of history? We have the drive to either tell our story or achieve some kind of objective. Does that drive interfere with our telling of the history? And particularly when we're sitting down and really thinking about the meaning behind our objectives, right? When we're trying to achieve our goals, and what does that mean? Are we then just simply recording events, or are we including a lot more than that? What's going on here? I continue on the second paragraph of this page. This is the 4th line. The history of the world, therefore, presents us with a rational process. This conviction and intuition is a hypothesis in a domain of history as such. In that of philosophy, it is no hypothesis. It is there proved by speculative cognition that reason is substance. Reason is the substance of the universe. Question, is history rational? When we look at the historical record of human progression throughout the world, is it a rational progression? Can we make sense out of this? A lot of people say, oh, this is all random. The achievements of humanity, the occurrences of human nature that happen throughout the world, throughout time, it's all random. It's just chance, and it's mostly based off of probability. But is there some rationality toward it? Meaning, can you infer some sort of direction, right? Some sort of like, okay, I see where this is going, and I can make a prediction based off of what's going on. And where we're going, that there's something behind that, something that's meaningful. Well, let me continue here on page 11, and this is the second line here. It is only an inference from the history of the world that its development has been a rational process, that the history in question has constituted the rational necessary course of the world's spirit, that spirit whose nature is always one and the same, but which unfolds its one nature in the phenomena of the world's existence. So Hegel is saying, yeah, there is some rationality to this. Human progression is going toward an ultimate goal. I'm going to skip down all the way to the last line. Same page. To him who looks upon the world rationally, the world in its turn presents a rational aspect. The relation is mutual. So Hegel's even saying, like, look, if you think about this rationally, world progression as a rational process, you will gain a rational perspective on things. You'll be able to make sense of what's going on. Next page here on page 12. This is the first line of the fourth paragraph. Nature is an embodiment of reason. That it is unchangeably subordinate to universal laws appears nowise striking or strange to us. Okay, so there's a rationality toward the history of humankind. There's a rationality toward the nature of humankind. I now go to page 20. This is the 17th line of the third paragraph. In the process before us, the essential nature of freedom, which involves in it absolute necessity, is to be displayed as coming to a consciousness of itself, for it is in its very nature self-consciousness, and thereby realizing its existence itself is its own object of attainment and the sole aim of spirit. This result it is at which the process of the world's history has been continually aiming, and to which the sacrifices that have ever and anon been laid on the vast altar of the earth through the long lapse of ages have been offered. This is the only aim that sees itself realized and fulfilled, the only pole of repose amid the ceaseless change of events and conditions, and the sole efficient principle that pervades them. Interesting. Let me read you my notes here. History is the process of self-actualization. Self-actualization. Okay, humans actualizing themselves. But I also write via freedom. They must have freedom to do so. This is what history is. Let me continue. This final aim is God's purpose with the world. But God is the absolutely perfect being and can, therefore, will nothing other than himself, his own will. The nature of his will, that is, his nature itself, is what we here call the idea of freedom. Translating the language of religion into that of thought. The question then which we may next put is, what means does this principle of freedom use for its rationalization? Okay, so what he's saying, Hegel, is that the ultimate truth, the process of history, is this ultimate truth, right? this divine being. That's what God is. Like, it's the will of God is what history is. That's the process. But this process has a nature behind it, which gives the process its, like, ability to move forward. That's his ultimate will. Hegel's saying, like, this ultimate will, this is the idea of freedom. The process of human beings developing throughout history is an expression of this freedom, this ultimate freedom. God's will is this freedom that humanity uses to progress into self-actualization, which is what history is. Okay. That's a lot. Let's continue. We're going to say that history is the process of human self-actualization. As the nature of humanity develops over time, this is what is history. And that is a process. Okay? And that process needs to have freedom to be carried out, to be carried forth. And Hegel goes further and says that not only does it need freedom to be carried out, this is what freedom is the carrying out of humanity developing, of human being becoming, the becoming of man as a human being. So let me move forward here because we're starting to use language in a cyclic manner. Right? So let's move forward here and develop this idea with some more quotes. Okay. So here we are on page 34. This is the last paragraph of this page. But though we might tolerate the idea that individuals, their desires and their gratification of them are thus sacrificed in their happiness given up to the empire of chance to which it belongs, and that is, as a general rule, individuals come under the category of means to an ulterior end. There is one aspect of human individuality which we should hesitate to regard in that subordinate light, even in relation to the highest, since it is absolutely no subordinate element, but exists in those individuals as inherently eternal and divine. Let's keep it rolling. Next page. I mean morality, ethics, religion, italics, morality, ethics, religion. Even when speaking of the realization of the great ideal aim by means of individuals, the subjective element in them, their interests and that of their cravings and impulses, their views and judgments, through exhibited as the merely formal side of their existence, was spoken of as having an infinite right to be consulted. Okay? I forgot to say, subjective is in italics. So, we're not talking about morality, ethics, religion as objects. Okay? We're talking about them as subjects, or humanity is the subject of these pursuits. Morality, ethics, and religion. Once we become subjective in those pursuits, that's when it starts to go down. That's when truth starts revealing itself. So we're not looking at these terms objectively, we're looking at these terms subjectively. We're looking at human beings in the world realizing their nature as subjects. Okay, now I'm going to start on the 12th line on this page 35. Human beings, least of all, sustain the bare external relation of mere means to the great ideal aim. Not only do they, in the very act of realizing it, make it the occasion of satisfying personal desires, whose purport is diverse from that aim, but they share in that ideal aim itself and are for that very reason objects of their own existence, not formally merely as the world of living beings generally is, whose individual life is essentially subordinate to that of man and is properly used up as an instrument. I confer to my notes here in the margins, just trying to make sense of this. Freedom is expressed through ethics toward the aim of self-actualization. Okay, how's freedom expressed? How do we exert our free will, human beings? How do we do it? Hegel is saying is expressed through ethics. That's how we express our free will. Okay, we develop ethics and then we carry them out. And that's how we express our freedom. And what is the ultimate goal? To realize who we truly are, to self-actualize, right? Like, oh, okay, this is who I am. I am this. I am a human being. Let me read you some more of my notes. Existence actualizes itself through the freedom of man. Okay, that's interesting. This is another thing Hegel is saying. Hegel is saying, look, existence, what existence is the humanity's freedom. If from humanity is not free, there is no existence. Ooh, that's a bold statement. Now, this is the meaning that I'm deriving from this, and this is what I think he's saying. So let's read some more quotes to support this supplementary commentary that I'm giving you. I skipped 5 lines down. That is to say, man is an object of existence in himself only in virtue of the divine that is in him. That which was designated at the outset as reason, which in view of its activity and power of self-determination was called freedom. So again, what Hegel is saying is that existence is within us all. It's within us, right? And how do we bring it out, right? We express it. That's how we express it, and we express that through our free will, which is a carrying out of history, the historic process. And this is what existence is. It is an expression of what is within humanity carried out. I skipped down a line. Religion, morality, etc. have their foundation and source in that principle, and so are essentially elevated above all alien necessity and chance. And here we must remark that individuals, to the extent of their freedom, are responsible for the deprivation and enfeeblement of morals and religion. That is the seal of the absolute and sublime destiny of man, that he knows what is good and what is evil. That is his destiny, his very ability to will either good or evil. In one word, that he is the subject of moral imputation. Imputation not only of evil, but of good. So here Hegel makes an assumption. He's saying, look, people know the difference between good and evil. Okay? They know when they're doing wrong, and they know when they're doing good. And this carrying forth of this knowledge is part of the process that is history. The acting out that is history. I'm going to skip to page 38. This is the 4th line. The insight then to which, in contradistinction from those ideals philosophy is to lead us, is that the real world is as it ought to be, that the truly good, the universal divine reason, is not a mere abstraction. Okay? So let's pause here. This universal divine reason, this ultimate reason, is not just an abstraction. This logic of obtaining this self-actualization of human existence. This isn't just some sort of abstraction. No, this is some practicality right here. So let me continue on the quote. But a vital principle capable of realizing itself, this good, this reason in its most concrete form, is God. Okay, so Hegel is putting a lot of weight into this reason, this process of self-actualization, this which is a freedom of humanity. This is what God is, and he's putting God, he's using the term God because he's trying to put this concept on the highest level. Okay, that's what you need to understand. God governs the world. The actual working of his government, the carrying out of his plan, is the history of the world. This plan philosophy strives to comprehend, for only that which has been developed as a result of it possesses bona fide reality. That which does not accord with it is negative, worthless existence. So the will of God is history. I feel like the use of God is, Hegel is trying to say, look, the history of the world is divine nature. This is extremely important. This is the ultimate reality of things. This process of human nature throughout time. Okay, it's very important that we think about it in this way. This is what Hegel's saying. He's putting it at a very high level. But let's talk more of freedom, free will, as a requirement for being, with capital B, being, right? Humans becoming, right? Realizing who they really are, who they truly are, and acting out that realization. Why is freedom necessary for this? Let's talk about that. I go to page 42, and I start at the 5th line. That man is free by nature is quite correct in one sense, vis-a-vis that he is so according to the idea of humanity, but we imply thereby that he is such only in virtue of his destiny, that he has an undeveloped power to become such. For the nature, quotes, of an object is exactly synonymous with its idea. But the view in question imports more than this. When man is spoken of as, quote, free by nature, unquote, the mode of his existence as well as his destiny is implied. His merely natural and primary condition is intended. In this sense, a state of nature is assumed in which mankind at large are in the possession of their natural rights with the unconstrained exercise and enjoyment of their freedom. I consult my notes here. The state of nature is necessary to exercise freedom. Ooh. Right? So nature has to be in the state for freedom to express itself. The world as it is, it's a cruel world. It's a very difficult world. A lot of very bad things happen in the world. But Hegel is saying that state, and not to imply that it's all bad all the time. There's very bad things that happen, there's very good things that happen. But this reality, as cruel as it is at times, is necessary for freedom to express itself, for freedom to be carried out. I skip down to the 2nd paragraph, still on page 42. What we find such a state of nature to be in actual experience answers exactly to the idea of a merely natural condition. Freedom is the ideal of that which is original and natural, does not exist as original and natural. Rather, must it be first sought out and won, and that by an incalculable medial discipline of the intellectual and moral powers. The state of nature is therefore predominantly that of injustice and violence, of untamed natural impulses of inhuman deeds and feelings. My notes say, an ideal must be realized. By definition, nature provides this process. So an ideal, is thought up and then it has to be actualized. The concept of an ideal is that, okay, I have this idea of this perfect thing or this thing that I feel that is truly what it is. Now, let me express this. Let me express this thing that I think is the ultimate truth or the actual reality of that. I want to express that. To express that ideal, there needs to be a process. There needs to be a process. And so Hegel is saying, a lot of cruel things happen in the world so that the ideals can be expressed. That's part of the process. That's like the failings of the ideal being reached. It's the working out of the ideal to actually happen. So I skip down to the last line here. This kind of constraint is part of the instrumentality by which only the consciousness of freedom and the desire for its attainment in its true, that is, rational and ideal form, can be obtained. To the ideal of freedom, law and morality are indispensably requisite, and they are in and for themselves universal existences, objects and aims, which are discovered only by the activity of thought, separating itself from the merely sensuous and developing itself in opposition thereto, and which must, on the other hand, be introduced into and incorporated with the originally sensuous will, and that contrarily to its natural inclination. So again, what Hegel is saying, and he's saying it in a more descriptive way, that freedom is the actualization of an ideal. And for that ideal to be actualized, There needs to be an objectification of a reality, an ideal, right? And then there needs to be some kind of process to realize that ideal. And that process needs to go through pure rational object, and it has to be exposed to sensual nature and actual reality. It has to be exposed to the nature of humans and the environment as well, to be worked out into something that is a part of reality. These ideals, which are the ultimate truth, need to be exposed to nature to be actualized. I skip down 3 lines. A constraint put upon impulse, desire, passion, pertaining to the particular individual, as such a limitation of caprice and self-will. We should look upon such limitations as the indispensable proviso of emancipation. The struggling of actualizing ideals is the requirement for those ideals to be actualized. So what does it mean to be human? It's a very serious question, and there's a very profound answer to that. And that answer needs to go through a process, to be answered, right? And that's going to be a struggle, a huge struggle. All right, there's going to be a lot of conflict. There's going to be a lot of sensations, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of hardships. There's going to be a lot of goodness to it as well. A lot of pleasure. It's going to be just all types of things are going to happen. But that process, the ideal human being, this ideal, needs to be exposed to nature where it can be freely obtained. You see where I'm going with this? Let's go to another quote. This is page 49, and I begin on the second paragraph. The state is the idea of spirit in the external manifestation of human will and its freedom. It is the state, therefore, that change in the aspect of history indissolubly attaches itself, and the successive phases of the idea manifest themselves in it as distinct political principles. So I put in my notes here, politics is the conception of will expressing freedom on a macro level, right? So, when we look at politics, we're looking at the carrying out of this freedom, this process of self-actualization of humanity as a whole, humanity as a subject, not just one individual, but humanity as a subject. And, when you look at politics, you're looking at a lot of craziness, a lot of suffering, a lot of struggle, a lot of conflict, which is all necessary in Hegel's mind to achieve this ultimate ideal, which is human being. I shall continue. The constitutions under which world historical peoples have reached their culmination are peculiar to them, and therefore do not present a generally applicable political bias. I put in my notes here, spirit equals self-consciousness. But I'm continuing on the next page. This is page 50, and we're going to start here on the last paragraph. We established the 2 elemental considerations. First, the idea of freedom as the absolute and final aim. Secondly, the means for realizing it, i.e., the subjective side of knowledge and will with its life, movement, and activity. We then recognize the state as the moral whole in the reality of freedom, and consequently as the objective unity of these 2 elements. Okay, the objective ideal being reached through freedom of humanity by being exposed to nature. And this is all this conflict. For example, we're talking about the state and we're talking about politics. If you think about geopolitics and the conflicts that go on throughout that, what Hegel is saying is that what you're witnessing is the ideal of human being being actualized. This is what history is. But let me continue. I skipped down. We're on page 51. We're on the 14th line. We observe, therefore, an essential union between the objective side, the idea, and the subjective side, the personality that conceives and wills it. The objective existence of this union is the state, which is therefore the basis and center of the other concrete elements of the life of a people, of art, of law, of morals, of religion, of science. All the activity of spirit has only this objective, the becoming conscious of this union, i.e. of its own freedom. What is that? That's self-actualization. That's what that is. Well, let me keep going. What is it that I'm about to say now? Well, let me read you the quote. Among the forms of this conscious union, religion, occupies the highest position. In it, spirit, rising above the limitations of temporal and secular existence, becomes conscious of the absolute spirit. And in this consciousness of self-existent being, renounces its individual interests, it lays this aside in devotion, a state of mind in which it refuses to occupy itself any longer with the limited and particular. What's that? That's transcendence. That's what that is. That's transcendence. Right? So you self-actualize. You're like, oh, okay, this is who I am. This is me, a human being. You realize, like, oh, a human being is not about being an individual. It's about being part of this whole universe. It's about being ecological, right? Knowing that I'm part of this mega, enormous structure that is the universe. And now, knowing that, I'm gonna transcend. I can really get down to business, right? So you transcend your own individuality to contribute to ultimate truth, right? This is what Hegel is saying. I'm gonna read you this quote here. I think it's a good summary of what he's saying overall, and what he feels the philosophy of history is. What is history? What does history really mean? Okay, I'm going to read page 58 here, and I'm going to begin on the last paragraph. Universal history exhibits the gradation in the development of that principle whose substantial purport is the consciousness of freedom. The analysis of the successive grades in their abstract form belongs to logic. In their concrete aspect to the philosophy of spirit, here it is sufficient to state that the first step in the process presents that immersion of spirit in nature, which has been already referred to. The second shows it as advancing to the consciousness of its freedom. The third step is the evaluation of the soul from this still limited and special form of freedom to its pure universal form. That state in which the spiritual essence attains the consciousness and feeling of itself. And I skip to page 75. This is the second paragraph. History in general is therefore the development of spirit in time, as nature is the development of the idea in space. That's basically what Hegel is saying, in a nutshell. What is history? History is the carrying out of human freedom to actualize what it really truly means to be human. So what does it mean to be human? We're not there yet. Not yet. But we're getting there. It's a process. And that process is history. Right? But Hegel argues that what it means to be human is so we are there, kind of, right? Because what it is a process. And it starts from the beginning of history all the way to the end of history. Okay? So we are self-actualizing, and that self-actualization is what it means to be human. It's an expression of human freedom fueled by the spirit, from within, this divine will of God, as what Hegel is saying, carried out in nature, in the world, for the ultimate goal, not only to realize who we are, but then transcend our individuality, like, okay, I'm just this one person, but actually my contribution is more than that. I contribute to this overall universe. So it's a form of transcendence too. This is history. So what I read to you right now was basically the introduction. It was just the introduction, which is about like a fifth of the work. The work is about 500 pages. The introduction is about 100. So after the introduction, he starts talking about, okay, civilization. We're going to talk about the ethnicities and the nations. And that's what he starts falling off, right? He starts talking about, well, Africa, this, Asia, this, America, this, and then it's like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. Let me read you an example. So this is page 103. I'm beginning here on the 20th line. But thus existing in a state, slavery is itself a phase of advance from the merely isolated sensual existence, a phase of education, a mode of becoming participant in a higher morality and the culture connected with it. Slavery is in and for itself injustice, for the essence of humanity is freedom, but for this man must be matured. The gradual abolition of slavery is therefore wiser and more equitable than its sudden removal. Really, really, of course. Privileged old white man, of course he's got to say that. Right? And let me keep going. At this point we leave Africa. He was talking about Africa, not to mention it again. For it is no historical part of the world. Bruh. It has no movement or development to exhibit. Historical movements in it that its northern part belong to Asiatic or European world. Carthage displayed there an important transitionary phase of civilization, but as a Phoenician colony it belongs to Asia. Egypt will be considered in reference to the passage of the human mind from its eastern to its western phase, but it does not belong to the African spirit. Okay, Egypt's not a part of Africa. Oh, okay, I see. What we properly understand by Africa is the unhistorical, undeveloped spirit still involved in the conditions of mere nature and which had to be presented here only as on the threshold of the world's history. See, this is why I call myself the Black Ponder, right? Because they get the black history wrong all the time. I'm just saying. So my point being, I read that just to say, like, when he starts getting into the actual record keeping of history, like this happened, and this means this, he's like wrong most of the time. Right? He's wrong most of the time. He comes from that very privileged, rich white man point of view. So I understand that. But I will say, like, the introduction before that is very good. It's very good, and it's also a great way to get into Hegel's mind. And I would also encourage you, go ahead and read the rest of the book. Read that inaccuracy of historical record that Hegel provides. Read it. And know that he's not right, but you get to get inside his mind. You start to understand, okay, this is the way he thinks. And let me convince to you why you should read it. I'm going to skip all the way to page 460. This is the 14th line of the second paragraph. Man's eternal destiny, his spiritual and moral position, must be wrought out in himself. In himself. Or herself. They should say they self. We should use gender neutral. But I mean, this is old school, of course. But anyway, let me continue. Cannot be an opus operatum, a work performed for him. But the import of that which is to take place in him, what truth is to become vital in him, was taken for granted, as something already given, something revealed by religion. Now, the principle was set up that this import must be capable of actual investigation. Something of which you, in this modern time, he puts brackets around that, in this modern time can gain an inward conviction in that this basis of inward demonstration, every dogma must be referred. And in my notes says, philosophical self-examination is critical to truth. So what I'm saying is, read Hegel. Read all of him. And then, you be the judge, but you gotta make informed decisions based off of reading and doing an actual investigation of, Hegel's work, of other classical philosophers' texts. I just want to end by saying, don't just go off of summaries or short presentations or the Black Ponder, right? Do the reading too, and you make the informed decisions. Philosophy is about self-investigation. It's about self-discovery, and you got to do the work. That's if you want to seriously get into philosophy, you got to sit down, you got to read, you got to think hard and think critically. We live in a world where truth is not easy to come by. It just isn't. I would argue that's the nature of this world. It's like you got to work to find what's true. You got to work your ass off to find what's true. You have to, and it comes from within too. You got to figure it out inside. Use other people, and other people help you out, and smart people, and read Hegel. Hegel's a smart man. But I would argue 400 pages of this work is incorrect, but the 100 pages that is very good is extremely good. So in any case, I would just encourage you, check it out. Check it out, read it. Lectures on the Philosophy of History, on Hegel's Philosophy of History. Check it out. It's free. You just download it on the internet. It's very old, so copyright is gone. A lot of people will say, "Oh, Hegel, I'm going straight to the phenomenology of spirit." And if you want to do that, hey, that's cool with you. I mean, I'm not hating. I'm just saying there's also a lot of value in his other works as well. There's a lot of value in his other works. And just because he's incorrect a lot of the time doesn't mean he's also not correct a lot of the time too. I mean, it is a reason why he has such a heavy influence in philosophy. There's a good reason for that. So check him out. Well, you've been watching The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.